types of experiences, some positive, some not so great. General thinking around, you know, it can be used effectively in terms of accessing services. We can push for better access to user-friendly information, ensuring that. And then also that example from Paula around the urine sampling and how the public sector duty was used to good effect to create change in practice there. And also bearing in mind that the public sector duty isn't just about local authorities, it's about all public bodies. And that we need to remember that as well. So back to you, Anne, to introduce Jacqueline.
Yeah, and this is my fault. I should have just gone through the agenda for the day just before I did hand over to Jacqueline. So I'm going to remedially do that now, really, really quickly. So yeah, that's my fancy first slide. So just again to say that this is part of a package. We have 3 other teams, and there are still places available for the second and third workshop if people are interested in any of the others. So just in terms of what we're going to do for the rest of the day, I suppose what we've tried to do is get Jacqueline to give us the facts, the figure, the whole, you know, the background to the public sector duty and how it can be used as a tool to ensure that bodies fulfil their legal obligations. And we'll have opportunities for questions and answers after Jacqueline speaks. Then we are going to have a break. We've scheduled it for half an hour, so hopefully we'll get a half an hour, because we do think that these Zoom meetings also need a break. And then we're going to try and bring you a practical example, and wearing slightly other hats. Myself and Rachel have been involved in work on the public sector duty in Galway City for a couple of years. So we're just going to give you an idea about what went on in relation to that work. And then more opportunities for questions and answers. And I think then one of the really important things about these sessions is there will be an opportunity for conversations in small groups on how to apply what we've learned. So a little bit around strategizing for how what we have heard can actually be used by people. So I am now going to hand over to Jacqueline to give us, I suppose, what is the keynote speech. And everybody, like most people know Jacqueline now anyway, at this stage, she's the Public Sector Duty Manager with IREC. She leads the Commission's work on supporting the effective implementation of the public sector duty within public bodies in Ireland. And before joining the Commission in 2017, Jacqueline worked for many years, and we all knew her then as well, in the non-government sector with national organisations focused on gender equality, migration, anti-racism and interculturalism. So over to you, Jacqueline.
Great, thanks. And I might just share slides then, if that's all right, because it's probably just easier to go through the duty that way. So I'll just do that now. Thanks very much. And thanks, Anne and Rachel, and thanks for inviting me here today. I always feel like when I come to these sessions that I'm just quite, I get asked great questions. So already have been great observations already. So thanks very much. So I suppose like I'll just get straight into it because of time and everything. But apologies in advance if some of this is too basic for people, you know, but I'm just kind of going that some people have a good knowledge and some people have less knowledge. So just to go through the basics. But with the public sector equality and human rights duty, it's contained in section 42 of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act 2014. So it's been 7 years as part of Irish law and its legal obligation on public bodies. And it has existed in other jurisdictions, say, such as the UK and Northern Ireland for many years. So, and then it became part of Irish law. Then we took it into our kind of jurisdiction. But I suppose just to emphasize that we're the only country in Europe that has what people call a composite duty. So it's not just equality, but it's equality and human rights. So that's kind of interesting from a European perspective. So what is the public sector equality and human rights duty? So in section 42, section 42.1, we kind of call it like the core obligation, you know, what the obligation is. And I'm going to actually just say it. A public body shall, in the performance of its functions, have regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, promote equality of opportunity and treatment of its staff and the persons to whom it provides services, and to protect the human rights of its members, staff, and the person to whom it provides services. So just in this, like, say, core obligation on public bodies to have regard, okay, there is a few things I want to point out. One, it's a statutory obligation since 2014. It applies across all the functions of an organisation. It applies to public sector staff and service users. So it's a kind of an internal and external kind of element to the duty. And that it's a positive duty. It's requiring public bodies to not wait around for a complaint to be made or a case taken against them, but that they would just look at, okay, what are the kind of gaps we have here around equality and human rights, and what do we need to look at and work on? So it's about them becoming equality and human rights compliant. And just on the core obligation bit again, like if a public body is, like, say, making a decision or developing policies, new policies, for example, you know, that have regard element of section 42.1 is really important, because if they don't have regard, then there is, like, the potential that you know, there could you know, a party could take a judicial review against that particular public body. So that has been the case in the UK. It hasn't been tested in Ireland as yet, but it appears from that it may be a possibility to do so in the future. So that's why it's really important for public bodies to engage with this statutory obligation. And I suppose just on the proactive bit, it shouldn't be the burden on you know, people in very vulnerable situations to take cases to vindicate their rights or vindicate their equality rights as well. Like, it should be the state that would do so. So what do public bodies have to do? And I just wanted to kind of take up, I can't remember who said it exactly in the session there, but public bodies are not just local authorities. Like, there's actually a definition of public bodies in our founding legislation that I just mentioned there, IREC Act 2014. So you know, it's across, like, government departments, state agencies, ETBs, universities. So it's a broad definition in our legislation. And so they're required to do three things. There's 3 steps. So assess, address, and to report. So first of all, to set out in their strategic plan an assessment of the human rights and equality issues it believes to be relevant to its functions and purpose, and to do so in a manner that's accessible to the public. So that's very important as well. We should be able to see that a public body has, you know, done an assessment, and so forth. And that also applies to the second step, which is address. So when they do the assessment, they have to also set out in their strategic plan the policies, plans and actions in place or proposed to be put in place to address those issues that have come up in the assessment, and to do so again in a publicly available way. Again, we should be able to follow all of this. So we know if a body is compliant or not by say looking at the website, looking at the strategic plan, looking at in the third step, annual reports. So in the third step, report, public bodies have to report on developments and achievements in relation to 1 and 2. Now, this is a very important point because I've noticed that, we've noticed a team here in IREC, tiny, small team, I might add, that people are reporting on stuff they're doing around equality and human rights in their organisation, which is also very, very welcome, but they haven't done an assessment. Like, the reporting is reporting on the actions that have come out of the assessment. So it's actually not possible to report on the duty if you actually haven't done an assessment according to a section 42. So that's something that we've been pointing out to public bodies, that the foundational step of assess is really, really important. Now, I'm going to go on a bit here, but that's kind of essentially what's in the public sector duty. But you might just say, like, why is this important in the Irish context? Well, it is, as I mentioned before, like, it should be the state's responsibility. It is the state's responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights in line with international commitments. And they need to be proactive in ensuring that all public bodies are human rights and equality compliant. And the duty as a catalyst for institutional reform is really, really important here because of that proactive, positive duty that I was talking about earlier on. It's like not waiting around for something to happen and be hauled up in front of like the WRC or whatever, but it's looking at being proactive so you can improve public services and then you can also improve workplaces as well. So that's the importance of it. So I mentioned earlier on about the strategic planning cycle, and this is very important because so that if it's in a strategic plan in a public body, then it will fall into annual work plans, and then it'll become part and parcel of how a public body mainstreams equality and human rights obligations into their daily work. So that's in section 42 to set out in your strategic plan, or they say however so subscribed. So in the case of local authorities, for example, it'd be a corporate plan, you know what I mean? But however, sometimes people call them statements of strategy as well. So just on this point, like there has been some quite a bit of activity in this particular area. In the sense of, if I just mention two particular sectors of the local authorities and government departments. So local authorities, after the last local election, we did a bit of work with the Department of Housing to put the duty into the corporate planning guidelines for local authorities. And then because of that, actually nearly every single, not everyone, but nearly every single local authority referenced the duty in their corporate plan. Now, some people maybe referenced the duty and said, we'll comply with our duty, and other local authorities like Meath County Council, for example, made more of a commitment of undertaking their assessment in the following year. So there was varying different degrees of reference. However, like as section 42 says, you have to assess, address. So you have to set out your assessment and your action plan. So a reference to the duty is not compliance with the public sector duty, okay? However, I think from a civil society perspective, if there's a reference there and a commitment to undertake an assessment, that's a really interesting and good opportunity for civil society to say, okay, they've said in their, I'll just pick one, for example, Fingal County Council, they've said they're going to do their assessment in the coming period, next 5 years in that corporate planning period. So there's an opportunity for organisations dealing with that local authority, civil society, to do some work with them around, well, we can inform your assessment, you know what I mean, with our lived experience or of particular issues. So that's why that strategic planning. The strategic plan is very important, just, from a civil society perspective, of seeing like what they're saying about the duty and can you utilise that a little bit. In addition, there's also government departments published their statements of strategy last year, and I think it was last year or the year before. No, it was last year. It was last year, early last year, and again there was varying degrees of reference to the duty. Not all the statements of strategies reference the duty actually, but of the ones that did, there was, again, maybe there's opportunities there for civil society to engage, although some departments, not many, but some departments actually complied with the duty with an assessment and an action plan. So I just wanted to give you an idea of that kind of activity that's going on and the importance of the strategic plan in the process. So across the functions, I mentioned this earlier on, that it's across the functions, and this is actually quite important in our monitoring of the duty as well, in that there's still a bit of work to be done with public bodies around, it's not just about service users, it's also about staff as well. So the internal and external kind of element of the duty. But it does apply to organisational planning and corporate services, so strategic planning, budget allocation, procurement and grant funding. And actually we've been doing like a fair bit of work with the Office of Public Procurement, Office of Government Procurement, sorry, the OGP, to put the duty into their national public procurement guidelines. Now on the OGP website just before Christmas, I think it was like just on Christmas Eve, if I remember correctly, or the day before, they have a human rights section on the OGP website, which clearly sets out that the public sector duty applies to public procurement, but they're also going to put it into the national public procurement guidelines as well for public bodies. So there's also human resources, so recruitment, HR policies and practices, and staff capacity building as well. It applies to service provision. If a public body has a function around research and policy, it also applies to that area. And then regulatory and oversight is also an area. So for example, like there are organisations like the Workplace Relations Commission, which is a regulatory body. So like say if they were making a decision on a particular case, like if they could reference the importance of implementation of the duty in those decisions, that would be very helpful in terms of a multiplier effect to public bodies in general. So it's just to say that this is so that a body can take a whole of organisation approach to equality and human rights, and it's not like the sole responsibility of a social inclusion unit, say within a public body, but it's across everybody. Everybody's is mindful of the need to have regard to eliminating discrimination, promoting equality, and protecting human rights. So, so just to let you know that we actually produced a guidance. We've a fair bit of guidance, but this is the kind of core guidance. So this is I call the Bible. I look at this quite a bit, I have to say. So, so that was sent out to all public bodies in 2019. So going back to that thing of what people were saying, there's a low awareness of the duty within public bodies. So this was sent out to the head of every public body and the head of corporate services, and this is back in 2019. So obviously, you know, there is awareness that needs to take place at all different levels, but certainly the public bodies, if they didn't know about the duty before that, they certainly know, they formally were notified about it through this guidance. And again, it's assess, address and report. And our guidance, what it does is it goes through our recommended process about how a public body can implement the duty in an effective way. Because as you probably know yourself, you could, as a public body, you could sit down and do an assessment and go, there's no issues here, everything is great. We just give all our services regardless of background to everybody. But then when they sit down and actually do an assessment, you know, issues arise. So what we wanted to do was from pilots that we did with public bodies. We did five pilots, actually with CAN, which Paula mentioned earlier on, 6 pilots we did, and that informed the guidance and the approach. I won't go into that because that would take another 10 minutes, but there are pilot video case studies on our website if you're interested in having a look at them, because they're very interesting. So just I wanted to spend a bit of time on step 1 because it's about the assessment. So you remember when I was saying earlier earlier on about that foundational step, which is assess. Because if you don't do the assessment, you can't come up with the actions, and then you can't report properly. So to be in compliance with your statutory obligation as a public body, you need this assessment piece. Is very, very important. And it's about, like, you know, sitting down and identifying the human rights and equality issues across your functions. And what we recommend to public bodies is to set up a cross-functional working group to undertake the assessment. And to do that as a form of a process as such. And just in the duty, it is a self-assessment process, you know what I mean? So it is up to the public body how they do it, but we have recommended in our guidance that sort of working group, if you don't already have one in place, like some organisations have, like equality committees, for example, already established, if they're big organizations like universities. But if you don't, it's highly recommended to set that up. And the focus of the assessment, and this will be very familiar to yourselves, is when you're doing your assessment, to be mindful of the people covered by the 9 grounds under the equality legislation. So you're looking at gender, civil status, family status, age, sexual orientation, disability, race, religion, and the traveller community. And also any human rights that pertain to the purpose and function of your particular public body. And with that, through that human rights lens, you can look at people at risk of poverty and social exclusion. Now, some of you might be aware that there's a review of the equality legislation going on at the moment, where there is a commitment in the programme for government for a socioeconomic ground, so an additional ground under the equality legislation. So, I mean, you know, that might also have to, so what we're kind of recommending to public bodies to be mindful of that commitment, and they may already start looking at that particular area of people at risk of poverty and social exclusion underneath the human rights kind of part of the duty. And then we're also mindful to say to public bodies, you need to be aware that people experience multiple forms of discrimination as well, and to be mindful of that when doing your assessment. So I think the one thing I would say, like, we did a review of our pilots with public bodies. And one of the things I remember the most about that review was the public bodies said it was actually the process that was the most important part of doing the public sector duty. So bringing people together, and what they realized was, like, there were known issues, you know, there's issues how we provide services, say, to people, to disabled people, for example. But then they also discovered many issues that were unknown. And I think that's the most important part of the public sector duty, the process by which a public body sits down and figures out, like, what are the really kind of priority issues for us with regard to human rights and equality. So I'm just going to, like, sorry, I'm just going to say, like, let me know if I'm going on too long, like, sorry, but I'm getting to the part now about civil society and the duty, if you know what I mean. So I hope I'm okay for time.
No, I think this is what people came to hear. Jacqueline, keep going.
Okay, Grant. Yeah. But just let me know if you need to cut me off, you know. So just one of the key messages of our guidance, as I mentioned earlier on, is evidence-based assessment. So we say to public bodies, you know, you have to take an evidence-based approach to undertaking your assessment. That's our recommendation, and we have been given a role in the legislation for guidance to public bodies. And one of the key things is we emphasise is consultation with staff and service users. and also with civil society organisations. So I've kind of bolded those two in the slide because that's very important, especially for ourselves here today. But also that they would look at data from the Central Statistics Office, reports and research from the ESRI or the Commission, and there's like huge, I'm just mentioning those, but there's huge kind of sources of research. There's cases taken to the Workplace Relations Commission as well that people could look at. So there's the wealth of evidence and information out there that public bodies are advised to tap into when they're doing their assess, that really important first step. And so just on that consultation bit and the role of civil society in supporting implementation of the public sector duty. So I'm just going to, so that's what I'm going to talk about now, like, because I've kind of covered like what the duty is and what public bodies are required to do. I suppose I'd end that part by saying like there is low compliance in the public sector. So that's, and I mean, we released our new strategic plan in February of this year, and the public sector duty is a strategic priority for us for the next 3 years. And it is because of that low compliance. Like there's a lot, we've done a lot of awareness raising. I think there is a lot more awareness of the duty over the last years, but compliance remains low, and that's what we're going to be tackling over the next 3 years. And we would like to be partners with civil society in working in bringing up the level of compliance as well in the public sector. So just in terms of the consultative approach, we have, as the Commission, have key messages to public bodies. So first of all, that we say to consult with service users and staff at each of the 3 stages of assess, address and report, and to do so in a timely way. So like say if a public body is going to do their strategic plan, that they would, right, this is the moment we're doing our public sector duty, we're doing our assess and address, the first 2 steps, because it's our strategic planning process is going on. And as part of that, we've read the IREC guidance. It says we have to consult with service users and staff. And so let's do that. We do it focus groups, we give ideas, we have a consultation tool on this that we produced in 2020, and it's about like whether you do like an inclusive focus group, whether you do a survey, but that consultation piece is very important. Now, just to say that's not in the legislation, this is something that I pointed out before, it's not said in section 42, you must consult as part of your assessment, but we have it, but we have been given a role as guidance and we have it in our guidance. So I just wanted to kind of say that because that's a kind of an important point. The second thing is that we say inclusive consultation with all identified groups. So really trying to get all groups together to have that consultation piece. And then inviting groups to give feedback on a draft assessment, draft action plan, and draft report as well. So you don't want to just do it for the assessment and the action plan, but say if you're doing your annual report as a public body, you want to say, well, let's go out and test with a group of service users as to, well, how have we done on progress and achievements? So it's and that's the kind of evidence-based approach that we have advocated in that consultation tool. And I have, by the way, I have links to all these guidance at the end of this presentation. So I'll show it to you later. So there are our key messages to public bodies. And then in terms of the civil society and the duty, and Paula might recognise this report just here, but I think that the pilot project we did with Saria and Can, I wasn't involved in it like myself, it was previous people in the commission who were involved, Deirdre Toomey and Donal Rice, but it was just a very valuable project to kind of see, to bring out the potential of the duty for civil society organisations and rights holders. So civil society organisations could potentially use the duty to highlight equality and human rights issues in their engagement with public bodies. They can communicate rights holders' expertise and help with that evidence-based approach that I was talking about earlier on. And it's about, like, say, for example, if a civil society organisation, if you're doing like a policy submission, or you're doing an advocacy work, or you're having a meeting with a minister, or you've seen in a strategic plan that they intend to do their duty, writing a letter to that particular public body and say, we note in your strategic plan that you have committed to starting your public sector duty, and we would like to be involved in that, and even quoting IREC's guidance on the importance of consultation with rights holders. So I mean, I'm just throwing out some ideas there, by the way. Like, we can discuss this more later, but I really like, what in the commission what we see is, like, we can monitor the duty, and obviously we have an enforcement power around the duty as well, but because we're a very small organisation, like small team anyway, that ourselves, like there's 3 of us on the team here at IREC, that we can, there's a lot of public bodies out there, so yeah, we do need to partner with other organisations in order to monitor compliance with the duty. And I suppose just on a last point there, going back to what I said earlier on, like in the UK, civil society have used the duty also in judicial review proceedings as well. So there actually has been a body of case law that has developed in the UK around now in the UK it's have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination. So it's slightly different. In the Irish context is to have regard. So we still have to develop that, probably our own case law around that ourselves. But I suppose just to say, like in the UK, civil society use the duty. Also say, for example, if a public body makes a decision to say stop funding a particular, they stop a funding stream, for example, and it has a particularly damaging effect on a particular community, that has been challenged in judicial review proceedings in the UK, and the public body has been found in breach of their duty and has had to restore the funding. Now, and by the way, I'm not saying about every case, but it's obviously dependent on the case, but it has been used quite a lot to that effect in the UK, and it could potentially be used in the Irish context, but it hasn't been, as I said, it hasn't been tested as yet. So the community, I just wanted to mention, I don't need to actually go through this because Paula has talked about it perfectly just at the beginning there of our session. But just to say that that Saria and Can worked with us to look at the human rights issues affecting service users when accessing drug treatment services. And I think this was a fantastic project where rights holders engaged directly with the Department of Health and the HSC, using the public sector duty to say, your practices, say around urine supervision of urine sampling, is contrary to the rights of dignity, of service users. So it was I think it was a very stark case. Obviously, there's still outstanding issues, as Paula said, around still the overuse of urine sampling to monitor. But I still think that it gave an idea of how the duty can be used, and the video case study of this is actually on our website as well, and also the publications from that project are available, I think, on the CAN Community Action Network website. Might also even be on our website now, I'm not 100% sure, but the video case study is on our website. So if you have time to look at it, I'd highly recommend you to look at that. It's about 10 minutes now, so I may not play it, but just talk a bit more about our grant scheme, which is actually quite important, because Fidelma will kill me if I don't mention the grant scheme.
Just got 5 more minutes, Jacqueline.
Yeah, that's okay. Grand. So that's great, because I'm just right on time then, Anne. So I just wanted to highlight that the grant scheme was launched very recently. And we have a grant scheme to fund civil society organisations only. But one of the strands, there's 2 strands, and one of the strands is dedicated to supporting compliance with the public sector duty. So it's to help us meet our strategic priority 5 about to encourage, report on and enforce compliance of public bodies with the duty. So just to say, like in the grant application, it actually states here, I actually won't even read it because I've actually talked to you about it. It's really about what I was saying there about raising awareness of the duty with public bodies, monitoring public bodies' compliance, capturing rights holders' experience, and supporting public bodies to take an evidence-based approach and utilising the duty to advance the human rights and equality issues of rights holders. So the deadline for grant applications is Wednesday, 18th of May, at 3 p.m. Fidelma said don't leave it until that day of Wednesday, 18th of May at 2 p.m. to start sending the application, because sometimes their issues can arise. But just to encourage people here, and please spread the word that that there is this strand, and really what we're looking for is projects to support public bodies really taking that evidence-based approach or raising awareness of the duty with public bodies. But more information on that, it's best to go to grants@irec.ie for more information on that, and it's also on our website as well. So I hope that's okay, but ask me questions about it if afterwards. And then finally, the Commission's role in relation to the duty. I've already kind of mentioned this already, but we have guidance and support, and then we have the suite of guidance that I've mentioned earlier on, but also where we can issue guidelines or codes of practice. And actually we're in the middle of the beginning to work on a code of practice for public bodies on the public sector duty. So that's a big task for us this year, which I'm quite excited about myself on doing that code of practice. And also that if a public body decides not to do their doesn't do their public sector duty, we can ask them to do their public sector duty. But we also in IREC have other enforcement powers. I think, for example, Paula mentioned the equality review. We can also use, say, the equality review under Section 42 of our Act to support implementation of the duty as well. So we do have that enforcement power. And then that's the suite of guidance. I won't go through it because I'll give you these slides afterwards, Anne and Rachel, if it's okay to circulate it to people afterwards. And then we have the links of the different resources. And that's it. There's all the resources there. But I mean, I'm really happy to, I think always of these things, the interesting is discussion is in the questions and comments from people. So I'll just leave it there before I confuse you even more. So I'll stop sharing now if that's okay. Thank you.
No, I think the opposite of confusion, Jacqueline. I think you always bring clarity to what can be, you know, kind of a difficult thing to get our heads around. So thank you so much for that. And just to say, we will be compiling the presentations after today's session. But in addition to that, we intend to develop a guide for each of the themes. So starting with the guide on the public sector duty, which will be a bit around, you know, what we've heard today, a bit about links to resources and other things. So you'll have them all in one place, which is, I think, yeah, you know, can be very useful sometimes. So I am, just for maybe 10 minutes, just if there are questions, just throwing it open to questions directly for Jacqueline. Lisa, is that your hand, I see?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, this might be an obvious question, Jackie, but like in the process of that assess, address and report, like all of this is done internally within the public body. So say like I work in Kildare County Council, I know there was a review in terms of traveller accommodation, I think done with Kildare County Council, but like they would do that piece themselves and then publish it. Like, is there external audits, or is there anybody else that kind of participates in that process, or is that all just internal?
Yes, that's a very good question, actually. So first of all, just to say, the assessment has to go across all the functions. So just to say, because sometimes people think like it's just one part. Say you mentioned the traveller bit, but it's across all the functions of an organisation. So looking at HR and service provision and so forth. But it is an internal process in the sense that we recommend that a cross-functional working group comes together and undertakes an assessment, because essentially, like saying Kildare County Council, you're the experts on the work that you do. You know what I mean? Like, and what we found with public bodies is when you went in, people knew what the issues were. But it was about just getting people together and just identifying what the issues were, and then prioritizing what the issues were for the next period. Because actually, a lot of issues come up for people. So, but in terms of the external part, I would say the external part is the consultation that we recommend public bodies to do. Do you know what I mean? Because you can't, I don't think you can really do the assessment in a kind of holistic and effective way if you don't do the consultation piece. So the consultation with staff and service users to ensure that you're really getting to the crux of the equality and human rights issues. But apart from that, it's essentially an internal process. And we have started actively monitoring. Now, we have been monitoring always, but we're doing much more systematic monitoring over the coming year, where we'll be looking at, say, Kildare County Council, we'll be looking at your website, looking at your strategic plan and your annual reports, and seeing, okay, have they done their public sector duty? So that's the, I suppose, the external monitoring piece that's going to be going on.
Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting. I always hate this bit, but I am just conscious of time and getting people time to get a cup of coffee. In some instances as well, probably rare as hen's teeth, when a public sector body has done the overall assessment, they have given it over to civil society to have a look at and to make comments and recommendations on. So we've had a direct experience of that. But as I said, that's probably rare as hen's teeth. Can I just get a sense of, if people do have a question, if you can put your hands up now so I can just get a sense of judging time. And I know, Fiona, you're first you're next with your hand up.
Yeah, and I think Jacqueline and I brought this before. So human rights and equality in regard to disabled people.